Before Hollywood, Dennis Weaver picked peaches for 10 cents an hour. His mother sold her wedding ring for $2. His brother died in an unheated shack. By the time he got famous, he had already survived things most actors couldn't imagine. But fame brought its own kind of trouble. He spent years trapped inside a character he didn't create. He nearly made the Olympics, but fell just short. He married a woman on the same night he proposed, with no plan at all. And the choices he made after McCloud ended confused almost everyone around him. What he walked away from is the real story. Dennis Weaver came into the world on June 4, 1924, in Joplin, Missouri. It was a hard place to grow up. The town sat in the Ozarks, crowded with rail lines, mine dust, smoke, and noise. Coal grime settled over houses and streets, and trains seemed to shake the whole place day and night. He was born Billy Dennis Weaver, the son of Walter Leon Weaver, known as Doc, and Lena Leora Prather. His father worked for the local electric company, doing exhausting work in a town that dealt with blackouts, labor tension, and constant instability. His roots ran deep in many directions. From his father came English, Irish, and Scottish blood. From his mother came Cherokee and Osage heritage. Dennis carried that with pride for the rest of his life. He spoke often about Cherokee toughness and Osage tradition, and he never forgot where he came from. But as a boy in white Missouri, that heritage could make him stand out in painful ways. Other kids mocked him and called him names. That kind of childhood leaves a mark. It also builds something hard inside a person. Even early on, danger felt close to home. In 1927, when Dennis was only 3, a mine explosion killed 48 people not far away. The shock of it rattled the town and reached families like his. His father earned only about $1.20 a day fixing damaged power lines, sometimes after storms and tornadoes tore through the area. The family lived modestly in a small shotgun house near Main Street, always close to trouble, whether it came from floodwater, bad weather, or plain hunger. Dennis watched hobos jump trains and drift through town looking for scraps, and somewhere inside him, a promise began to form. He wanted out. He wanted a bigger life. Years later, that same restless energy would show up on screen in performances filled with nerves, edge, and fire. Then the Great Depression hit, and whatever little stability the family had left began to fall apart. In 1929, when Dennis was 5, his father lost steady work. Joplin was hit hard. Jobs vanished. Farms were lost. Families got crushed. The Weavers had to survive however they could, and that meant turning to rough, uncertain work. They lived as sharecroppers on a small 40-acre piece of land outside town. And Dennis learned early that childhood did not excuse anyone from labor. By age 7, he was up before dawn milking cows and working the fields by hand. He harvested corn in brutal summer heat and earned almost nothing for it. Dust Bowl storms rolled through Missouri and buried everything in dirt. Life became one long fight against weather, hunger, and bad luck. From 1934 through the late 1930s, the family joined the wave of migrant workers heading west. They packed into an old Model T and made yearly trips to California and Oregon, chasing seasonal work like thousands of other displaced families. They slept in ditches, in camps, in makeshift shelters, anywhere they could. In Manteca, California, they picked peaches for 10 cents an hour in sheds, where slow workers could get screamed at or beaten. In Oregon hop fields, young Dennis had to avoid child labor raids, while the family survived on almost nothing. At times, they lived on one meal a day. His mother once pawned her wedding ring just to bring in $2. Back home, they ate dandelion soup. Dennis caught rabbits with his bare hands. This was not a passing rough patch. It was the shape of his childhood, In 1932, the family suffered another terrible blow when his brother died young from pneumonia in an unheated shack. That kind of loss does not leave quietly. It settles into the bones. By 1937, Dennis was staying in Manteca with the Hografe family, trying to make himself useful. He cleaned the El Rey Theater after late-night shows, scrubbing up messes left behind by drunks and exhausted crowds. It was dirty work, but it gave him something important. He got to watch movies for free. He saw the glow of the screen, the pull of performance, the way a story could take people somewhere else for a while. Out of all that hardship, a dream began to grow. And that is what made Dennis Weaver so unusual. He was not just a kid carrying pain and hunger. He was also gifted, driven, and built for motion. At Joplin Junior College, from 1940 to 1942, he threw himself into sports with the same force he brought to survival. He stood 6'1" and had the kind of frame that could dominate a football field, but that was only part of it. He played football, basketball, and track, and did it all well. On the football field, he was a fullback who could punish defenses and break open games. On the basketball court, he scored heavily and came through in big moments. In track, he set marks in the long jump and high hurdles that made people pay attention. Yet even while he was doing all that, he was also drawn to the stage. That was the surprise. The tough athlete had a deep pull toward performance. He joined drama club and took roles seriously. In December 1941, he played Hamlet and stunned people who assumed a jock could never handle real acting. But Dennis had already been chasing that side of himself for years. From the time he was a child, he loved movies and performance. He memorized lines from stars he admired and soaked up every chance to step into another world. At Joplin High School, he acted in play after play. He had a voice that carried. He had presence. He could command attention without trying too hard. In one school production, he even ad-libbed from his own life and brought an audience to its feet. That mix made him hard to explain to people around him, but that was just the beginning. Soon they were on the road, moving again and again, chasing survival. From Missouri to California, then Oregon, then back again. They lived out of cars, slept wherever they could, picked fruit for pennies. Sometimes they ate once a day, sometimes even less. His mother sold her wedding ring just to get a little money. And in between all of this, he watched people around him break down, lose everything, even lose their lives. His own brother died young from illness in those harsh conditions. Yet somehow, even in that chaos, something inside him kept looking forward. At night, after cleaning theaters or wandering around town, he would sneak moments with movies. He watched actors on screen and memorized their lines. It was small, almost invisible at first, but that spark stayed alive. And then came another side of him that surprised everyone. Back at school, he was not just surviving, he was dominating. On the field, he ran harder than anyone. In football, basketball, and track, he stood out. He broke records, scored points, and pushed his body to its limits. At the same time, he was stepping onto the stage, acting in plays, speaking lines with a confidence that did not match the life he came from. People did not understand him. A tough athlete who loved acting did not fit into the world around him. Some mocked him, others doubted him. But he kept going, because by then, he had already lived through things that made small opinions feel meaningless. Then the world shifted again. War arrived. After World War II began, he left everything behind and joined the U.S. Navy. He trained as a pilot and flew the Grumman F-4F Wildcat, stepping into skies filled with danger. There were no second chances up there. Every mission demanded focus, discipline, and calm under pressure. And that pressure shaped him in a way nothing else could. When the war ended, he came back different. Not broken, but sharper. More aware. He went to the University of Oklahoma and studied theater, but he did not leave athletics behind. He kept competing, even pushing himself into decathlon events. In 1948, he stood at the edge of something big, the Olympic trials, a chance to reach the world stage. But life does not always line up perfectly. He arrived tired from travel, his body not fully ready. He pushed through anyway, fought till the end, even won the final race. But it was not enough. He finished 6th, just short. That moment hit hard. It felt like everything slipped away at once. But sometimes, what feels like the worst loss quietly opens another door. And for him, it did. Because after that, he turned fully toward acting. He moved to New York with his wife, trained at the Actors Studio, surrounded by rising talents. He learned how to bring truth into performance, how to make a character feel real, not performed. That training stayed with him. It shaped everything that came next. And then came love, the kind that does not wait for perfect timing. He met Geraldine Stowell at a college dance. One quick glance, one moment, and something just clicked. Years later, during a football game, with no plan and no warning, he turned to her and asked her to marry him. Just like that. And she said yes, just as quickly. They did not wait. That same night, they drove out of town and got married before midnight. No big ceremony, no preparation. Just two people choosing each other without hesitation. And that choice stayed strong for decades, through struggle, through success, through everything. Because success did not come quickly. When he first reached Hollywood, he had almost nothing. He took whatever work he could find. His wife supported him quietly, working jobs while he chased auditions. It was not glamorous. It was survival again, just in a different form. Then, in 1955, everything changed. He landed a role in the Gunsmoke. But even then, he did something unexpected. He added a limp to his character, something no one asked for. It made the character unique. It made him real. And people believed it so much that they thought it was real. Letters poured in from viewers offering help, treatment, even money. In 1958, Dennis Weaver was still mostly known as Chester Good, the limping deputy on Gunsmoke, which had been on CBS since 1955. That was the image people had fixed in their minds. Then Orson Welles saw something else in him. After watching Weaver on the show, Welles cast him in Touch of Evil, the dark crime film he wrote and directed. The part was small. Weaver played the nervous night manager of a shabby roadside motel. Still, the moment he stepped into that role, something shifted. He did not play the man in a neat or polished way. He made him twitchy, uneasy, almost haunted. He lurched around in that cheap uniform. His eyes kept moving, and his voice sounded thin and cracked. The performance felt so strange and so real that critics began talking about him in a completely different way. For the first time, Dennis Weaver was not just a television sidekick. He looked like a serious, dramatic actor. What made that performance stick even more was one odd little phrase. In the motel scenes, Weaver kept saying, "Another think coming." He turned it into a habit of speech, almost like a nervous reflex. It was the kind of line that could have passed by unnoticed, but the way he delivered it made it memorable. It sounded personal. It sounded lived in. And one of the people who never forgot it was a teenage boy in New Jersey named Steven Spielberg. Years later, Spielberg would remember not only the line, but the feeling Weaver gave it. That mattered. Because when Spielberg cast him in Duel in 1971, he had Weaver say that same phrase again, "You've got another think coming." quietly connecting the new role to the old one across more than a decade. That link was not an accident. Working with Orson Welles had changed Weaver. By 1958, Welles was already a giant because of Citizen Kane from 1941 and everything that came after it. On the set of Touch of Evil, he pushed Weaver to stop thinking like a television actor who simply hit marks and said lines. He wanted something looser, stranger, and more alive. He encouraged improvisation. He pushed posture, timing, and reaction. He shaped scenes with camera angles, shadows, and sound so that Weaver's body language became part of the tension itself. Later, Weaver said years on Gunsmoke had taught him one kind of acting, but Welles showed him another. He showed him how a character could feed electricity into a scene. The strange part is that this great turning point in Weaver's career came inside a film that failed when it first came out. Touch of Evil opened in April 1958, and it did badly at the box office. Universal did not trust Welles's dark and complicated version of the movie. The studio took it away from him, recut it without his approval, and removed nearly 10 minutes. Weaver's eerie motel scenes stayed in, and critics noticed them, but the movie itself was buried. It got little promotion and disappeared quickly. So the role that should have opened doors for Weaver did not really do that right away. What he got was praise, not momentum. Hollywood liked the performance, but the film carrying it had already been marked as a failure. That left him in a frustrating place. Even after Touch of Evil, he was still stuck in the shadow of Chester Good. Gunsmoke would run all the way from 1955 to 1975, and even by the late 1960s, casting directors kept looking at Weaver and seeing only the loyal deputy in the Stetson. They did not see the jittery actor from Welles's film. They did not see danger or nerves or depth. By 1969, when Weaver finally left Gunsmoke, he was fighting two battles at once. He was trying to escape one famous role, and he was trying to convince the industry that his future did not have to look exactly like his past. That is part of what made Duel hit so hard later on. When audiences saw him in that film, scared and unraveling and desperately human, it felt like a shock because it broke the story Hollywood had already written for him. That break began in early 1971 when Steven Spielberg, only 24 years old, came across Richard Matheson's short story, Duel, in Playboy magazine. At that point, Spielberg was mostly known for directing television episodes, including Night Gallery. He was young, talented, and unproven. But when he read the story about a lonely salesman hunted on a California highway by a faceless truck driver, he saw the movie immediately. He pushed hard to direct it himself, even though Universal was not exactly handing him a grand opportunity. The budget for the TV movie was only about $450,000, barely enough for film stock, crew, and trucks. Still, Spielberg fought for it, and within weeks he was shooting what would become one of the most tense chase films ever made. Then came the question of who would carry it. The studio wanted a safer choice, a more obviously marketable television star. Spielberg wanted Dennis Weaver. By then, Weaver was in his mid-40s, and to a lot of people he was still Chester from Gunsmoke. But Spielberg remembered something else. He remembered that motel manager in Touch of Evil, all nerves and bottled panic. That was exactly what Duel needed. The story only worked if the man in the car felt real. He had to feel ordinary, decent, and vulnerable. He had to look like someone slowly falling apart under pressure. Spielberg believed Weaver could do that better than anyone, and he built the whole paranoid mood of the film around him. Filming started in September 1971 along a 25-mile stretch of California's Soledad Canyon. The shoot was supposed to last 10 days, but it stretched to 13 because Spielberg kept pushing for the exact angles he wanted. Weaver did many of his own stunts. In the 1970 Plymouth Valiant, he sometimes drove past 90 miles per hour. The most intense moment came at the end, when the truck goes over the cliff. Weaver had to leap from the moving car seconds before impact. On screen, it looks terrifying, and that is because it was built to feel real. Spielberg later said they had rehearsed it again and again, and that Weaver had plenty of time to get out. But even with that reassurance, the footage still carries raw danger. When Duel aired on ABC on November 13, 1971, it was supposed to be just another TV movie. Instead, about 20 million Americans watched it, and critics were stunned by how strong it was. Universal quickly realized they had something bigger than they expected. The following year, they expanded the film to 90 minutes and released it in theaters across Europe. The response there was even more striking. In London, The Times compared Spielberg's direction to Hitchcock. In France, critics called him the new master of suspense. For Weaver, Duel became the performance that finally showed the full force of what he could do. After years of being seen as a comic sidekick or dependable TV actor, he had proven he could hold an entire film on his own. And that is what makes Duel so fascinating. It came from the edges of Hollywood, not the center. It was directed by a 24-year-old without feature film credits. It starred an actor many people thought they already understood, and it came from a short story, published in Playboy, not some grand literary magazine. Yet this lean, low-budget project, shot on hot highways with borrowed trucks and tight schedules, ended up outclassing many bigger thrillers of its time. For Dennis Weaver, it was proof that his talent had been there all along. For Spielberg, it was the spark that lit everything that followed. Within 4 years, he would make Jaws in 1975. But Duel was where the fire first caught. By then, though, Weaver had already found another success on television. When McCloud premiered on NBC on September 16, 1970, the idea sounded almost ridiculous. A deputy marshal from New Mexico solving crimes in New York City, sometimes even on horseback, did not sound like a sure thing. In fact, a lot of people in Hollywood thought the concept would fail. But Dennis Weaver made Sam McCloud so likable that viewers went with it. The humor worked. The culture clash worked. The strange image of a cowboy lawman moving through Manhattan traffic somehow worked. The show caught on fast, and it stayed alive for 7 seasons, ending on April 17, 1977. By then, Weaver had become one of the most familiar faces on American television, and the competition was not easy. Starting in 1971, NBC placed McCloud in its mystery movie wheel alongside Columbo with Peter Falk and Macmillan and Wife with Rock Hudson. These were major stars in major shows, and each series rotated in the same time slot. That meant Weaver had to share space with some of the biggest names on television every month. Yet McCloud held its place for 7 straight years. That alone was impressive. Even more surprising, in some weeks of 1973, McCloud actually outperformed Columbo in the ratings. Viewers liked the contrast. They liked watching this easygoing Western lawman bounce off the hard edges of New York. Off-screen, though, Weaver was becoming someone very different from the man viewers saw on television. Cast and crew said he was deeply professional. He showed up early, knew his lines, and did not waste time. But during the years McCloud was running, from 1970 to 1977, he was also going through a serious inner shift. He became interested in Eastern thought. He practiced transcendental meditation through the movement of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. He read about nonviolence, spiritual growth, and what he once described as trying to find the truth inside instead of outside. So while millions of fans saw him as a rugged cowboy figure, Weaver himself was quietly moving in a very different direction. That change slowly pulled him away from Hollywood's usual values. At the height of McCloud's success, When huge audiences were watching him every week, Weaver was already growing uneasy with the whole fame machine. In interviews around 1975, he talked openly about his dislike of false glamour and waste. Instead of leaning harder into celebrity, he started leaning toward activism. He joined the board of Earth Communications Office, known as EQO, a nonprofit group using media to promote environmental awareness. He spoke about pollution, sustainability, and vegetarianism long before those subjects became common in celebrity culture. So even while he was still playing a gun-carrying lawman on television, he was becoming one of Hollywood's earliest well-known environmental advocates. That helps explain why he walked away when McCloud ended in April 1977. NBC talked about possible revivals. There was money on the table, but Weaver did not want to keep circling the same kind of fame. In 1978, he chose a different project, Centennial, the huge NBC miniseries based on James Michener's best-selling novel. Weaver played trail boss R.J. Poteet, and the production stretched across the open landscapes of Colorado and Wyoming. Running nearly 25 hours, it was one of the biggest television projects of its time. For Weaver, it felt less like chasing relevance and more like returning to something real. He had once been a rodeo cowboy from Missouri. Out there in the wide spaces again, the work felt closer to home. And then, in the years that followed, he pushed even further away from normal Hollywood life. After his Gunsmoke fame and long television career, Dennis Weaver and his wife Jerry built something few people expected from a screen star. In Ridgway, Colorado, starting around 1990 and 1991, they worked with architect Michael Reynolds to build a radical Earthship home. The structure used about 2,500 old car tires, each packed with roughly 400 pounds of dirt, forming thick walls about 2.5 feet wide. Aluminum cans and earth were used for more insulation, and the whole thing was covered in smooth adobe. The house was around 10,000 square feet. It used passive solar design to stay comfortable through the seasons without normal heating ducts or air conditioning. In south-facing indoor planters, winter tomatoes could grow. At first, neighbors laughed and called it a garbage house. Then they saw the finished place and changed their minds. It was beautiful, practical, and unlike anything else around. Weaver even helped peel beetle-killed vigas himself. That home was not some side hobby. It fit perfectly with what he and Jerry were building in the rest of their lives. In 1993, the couple founded the nonprofit Institute of Ecolonomics in Berthoud, Colorado. The word itself blended ecology and economics. That was the point. Weaver wanted to challenge the idea that protecting the environment and making money had to oppose each other. With support that included a $250,000 grant from the Annenberg Foundation, the group promoted sustainable technology and alternative energy. Weaver argued that if society failed to build both a healthy environment and a healthy economy, everyone would suffer. He did not treat environmental work as symbolic. He treated it as practical. He poured money, time, and energy into the cause, surprising fans who still expected him to just show up in another acting role. His interest in clean technology led him into another area long before it was fashionable. During the 1990s, Dennis Weaver became a strong public supporter of hydrogen-powered vehicles and other alternatives to fossil fuels. Through his institute, he helped sponsor Drive to Survive in 2001 and again in 2003. These events featured caravans of alternative fuel vehicles traveling from the Santa Monica Pier in Los Angeles all the way to Washington, D.C., arriving by May 14, 2003. The caravans included gasoline-electric hybrids, biodiesel pickups, and even Toyota's hydrogen fuel cell car, though fueling options were still limited. Toyota and BMW were among the sponsors. Weaver himself drove a hybrid and used the tours to warn about American dependence on oil. He was talking this way years before clean vehicle culture became mainstream. His activism was not limited to the environment either. Back in 1972, during the bitter Nixon-McGovern presidential race, Weaver publicly supported George McGovern. That was a risk. The memory of blacklisting in Hollywood was still very real, and political activism still scared many actors. But Weaver fundraised, organized, and put his name behind the anti-war Democrat. He joined events with people like Warren Beatty, and he was part of the Together for McGovern rally at Madison Square Garden, which also featured Simon and Garfunkel and Dionne Warwick. McGovern lost badly. Nixon took 60.7% of the vote to McGovern's 37.5%. But the loss does not erase the fact that Weaver took a stand, when standing publicly still carried consequences. Over time, he carried that same direct energy onto bigger stages. He testified before the U.S. Congress on issues like pollution and hunger. He also spoke at major events tied to global environmental concerns, including Peace and the Planet gatherings around 1990 and 1991 in Eugene, Oregon. He talked about toxic chemicals, eroding land, fossil fuels, and the damage being done to ecosystems. He pushed lawmakers towards systemic answers, including proposals tied to his larger economics ideas. He warned that without change, hunger and environmental breakdown would worsen together. This was a long way from Chester Good. Here was a former television cowboy speaking to leaders and policymakers about the future of the planet. By the late 1980s, the pull away from Hollywood had become permanent. Dennis Weaver bought land in Ridgway, Colorado, in 1988. The town was tiny, only around 900 people, sitting near Ouray beneath sharp mountain peaks, and blessed with around 300 sunny days a year. After decades in Los Angeles and years of breathing its smog, Weaver was ready for something else. In 1990, he and Jerry moved there full-time. They had been married since 1945, and now they built a different kind of final chapter together. Their Earthship, known as Sunridge, sat on 22 acres near the Uncompahgre River. It used old tires, cans, reclaimed beams, and large south-facing glass to capture solar heat. The place had a pond, a meditation hut, and space to grow food. It was not just a retreat, it was a statement. While other stars stayed close to premieres and parties, Weaver stepped away and chose the mountains. Then came the part of his story he kept mostly private. Dennis Weaver battled prostate cancer for years, and he did so quietly. By 2006, the disease had become severe. He did not make it public in a dramatic way. He did not turn it into a media campaign. Even those close to him did not always know how much pain he was carrying. He had lived as a vegetarian since 1958. He had spent years promoting environmental health and cleaner living, but illness still came for him. In private, he told family members near the end that the disease was irreversible. He did not want pity. He wanted dignity. On February 24, 2006, at about 3 p.m., Dennis Weaver died at home in his Earthship in Ridgway, Colorado. He was 81 years old. His wife Jerry was there, along with their sons Rick, Robbie, and Rusty. He did not die surrounded by industry people or in the glare of Hollywood attention. He died in the place he had chosen, with the mountains outside and his family close by. After 290 episodes of Gunsmoke as Chester and 46 episodes of McCloud, after all the public years and all the private changes, he ended his life on his own terms. The quiet of that ending matched the life he had built in Colorado. It also came after personal grief, including the 2003 death of his daughter-in-law Lynn in the Santa Monica Farmers Market crash that killed 10 people. By then, Weaver's turn away from Hollywood had become absolute.